Our State of the U.S. segment tonight. The United Nations voted this morning to condemn the U.S. for recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. 128 countries voted in favor of the condemnation. Only 9 voted against it, with another 35 countries cowardly abstaining. The Trump administration warned of funding cuts if Jerusalem wasn't recognized. And U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley said the U.S. is taking names of those who voted to condemn us, and we're going to move the embassy to Jerusalem anyway, regardless of what the UN thinks. Watch.
The United States will remember this day in which it was singled out for attack in the General Assembly for the very act of exercising our right as a sovereign nation. We will remember it when we are called upon to once again make the world's largest contribution to the United Nations. And we will remember it when so many countries come calling on us, as they so often do, to pay even more and to use our influence for their benefit. America will put our embassy in Jerusalem. That is what the American people want us to do, and it is the right thing to do. No vote in the United Nations will make any difference on that. But this vote will make a difference on how Americans look at the UN and on how we look at countries who disrespect us in the UN. And this vote will be remembered.
With me now, former IDF soldier and former NYPD officer Micha Danzig. Micha, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Liz.
All right, I'd just like to say from the get-go, Nikki Haley might be the very best appointment that President Trump has made in the entirety of his first year.
Bar none. Amen.
Bar none. No, I think so. I mean,
Yes.
Her point about the money, how much money we give, how much money do we give, and is there a nation around the world that gives more to the United Nations than the United States does?
There's no nation that gives more, period, of course, and when it comes to international charity, international sponsorship, and obviously the UN is fully funded 33%. At least by the United States of America. Nikki Haley said it also well with respect to the veto that she had to issue the other day in the UN Security Council on the same issue, a challenge to U.S. sovereignty as to where the U.S. decides to place its embassy at the Security Council. She looked around the room at the other people in the Security Council and said, basically the nerve of you people. You're telling us that we don't do enough for the Palestinians. We fund fully more than a third of all charity that goes to the Palestinians, all aid that goes to the Palestinian Authority, all aid that goes to the UNRWA, the specific refugee agency in the UN just for Palestinians. And she looked around the room and she said, most of you people don't even give 1% to the Palestinians. And you have the temerity to tell the United States that it's not doing enough for the Palestinians? I mean, that's chutzpah.
Right, it is. I mean, talk about biting the hand that feeds you. I mean, the United States alone, and this is horrible, actually funds the Palestinians' pay-to-slay program.
Right, which needs to stop now.
Right, which needs to stop. We give plenty of money here. So 128 member states voted to condemn the United States. Only 7 other states voted to join the United States and Israel in voting against this resolution. 35 people abstained, which I just find to be the epitome of cowardice here. The United Kingdom voted to condemn the United States. Britain voted to condemn the United States. I couldn't even wrap my mind around that.
Well, look, this reminds me of a very famous statement by Israel's former UN ambassador and then foreign minister Abba Eban. He back then said, if Algeria sponsored a resolution at the UN that the earth was flat and that Israel flattened it, it would pass by a vote of 163 to 13 with 29 abstentions. Right? So that's what the UN is. The UN has always been a bastion of looniness and immorality and anti-Semitism when it comes to Israel. I mean, this entire diatribe that is going on in the UN and all the clamor that's going on in the UN and in the, quote, international community over Jerusalem being recognized by the United States as Israel's capital is the height of hypocrisy and immorality. I mean, just think about who sponsored this current resolution. Turkey and Yemen. Turkey and Yemen are sponsoring an emergency resolution to talk about Jerusalem being recognized as Israel's capital. 1 million people have now been diagnosed as having cholera in Yemen. Yemen's in the middle of a civil war that has killed 20,000 people and wounded over 70,000 people. And yet Yemen is sponsoring an emergency resolution about a fact that is as real as you and I sitting here talking today on this TV show, that Israel's capital is Jerusalem? That's what the emergency resolution's about? And Turkey, a country that bombs the Kurdish people, wantonly, that still refuses to recognize its own genocide of the Armenian people, that's the moral authority sponsoring a resolution on Jerusalem? The hypocrisy here is galling.
Right. It's also just stupid because the United States has already formally recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel before. We're just only now putting it into action. Like I said, it's stupid as well as hypocritical and all those things. So this is what Turkey's representative said. This again made my jaw drop. He said, "This flames the fires of violence and extremism in the Middle East." Micha, first of all, it seems to me that justifies terrorism. That's saying, well, if the United States does this, makes sense that you're gonna incite violence in the Middle East. That's saying terrorism is justified. But if I'm not mistaken, wasn't there already violence in the Middle East before Trump declared he was going to move our embassy?
It's such utter nonsense. Again, it's this idea that everything in the Middle East focuses on the Arab-Israeli conflict. And if it wasn't for the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Middle East would be just Switzerland or Costa Rica. It's ludicrous. Again, as I mentioned, look at Yemen. Look at what's going on in Turkey, where they've arrested thousands of people for simply voicing their political opinions. Look at Syria, just to the north of Israel. 500,000 dead already, millions of refugees, having nothing to do with the Arab-Israeli conflict. The notion that Trump is fanning the flames, again, by saying something that's as real as saying that the United States of America is an independent country, that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. This whole thing is so wrong and hypocritical. And it's also based on complete ahistorical hypocrisy, too.
Right.
The reality is that they want to take the position that the Jerusalem is shouldn't be recognized as Israel's capital, because back in 1948, the UN proposed in a partition plan that the Arabs said no to, that Jerusalem would be a corpus separatus, which meant that it would be part of the international community for a 10-year period after 1948 until its final status was decided. And guess what? Bethlehem was also supposed to be an international city under the jurisdiction of the UN under that partition plan. But the Arabs said no when the Jews said yes. As Abba Eban also famously said, they never pass up an opportunity to pass up an opportunity. They attacked Israel. They lost that war, but in that war, Jordan took possession of both Bethlehem and separated Jerusalem in two. And it took the holiest parts of Jerusalem, including the Old City with the Jewish quarter and all of the most significant holy sites to the Jewish people, and it took possession of them. And then it blew up 55 synagogues, and it destroyed and desecrated Jewish cemeteries, using Jewish cemeteries, the tombstones, to build their buildings. They had donkeys walking up and down alongside the Western Wall, the holiest site to the Jewish people, and literally going to the bathroom in front of the Western Wall, the holiest site.
Well, it goes back to what you were saying last week, that the Palestinian Authority has no real desire to come to the negotiating table. They have no real desire to broker a peace deal here. The only thing that they want is the extermination of Israel and the Jewish people, and that's not someone that you take credibly. So we're out of time here, but just the final point I want to make is Nikki Haley is a badass, taking names of people who voted against this, and I certainly hope that the Trump administration is good on their word and that they cut funding to the United Nations, because an organization like this does not deserve our money when they're going to vote against us and condemn us. Micha, thanks so much for coming.
If I may add, the UN has no moral authority here. From 1948 to 1967, they did nothing and said nothing when the Jordanians desecrated Jewish holy sites and bombed them. They have no moral authority today to talk about it
whatsoever. Whatsoever. And that's why Nikki Haley said it doesn't matter what they say. We know what's right. Jerusalem's the capital of Israel, and our embassy is going to be there. Micha, we do have to go. Thanks for being here. All right, guys, we've got a good one for you next. The average single mother in the United States will see a 70% tax cut under the new tax bill. Yet, Democrats oppose this. Think about that. We'll challenge a Democrat about how they can oppose a bill that helps middle-class and lower-income Americans when we come back. Hit me up on Twitter at Liz_Wheeler over the break, and we'll see you back here in just a minute.